happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
You're listening to Arkansas Preps Weekly on Natural State Sports, your top source for the biggest news in high school sports across Arkansas.
And here we go.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining us on episode 45 of Arkansas Preps Weekly here on the Natural State Sports Network alongside Kevin Bohannon. My name's Kyle Sutherland. The final episode of 2024 football coverage, Kevin. We still got some postseason awards to give out, which, by the way, I posted. Of course, we're recording on a Monday morning. I posted earlier this morning. If you have any nominees, be sure and either DM those to Kevin or myself, or you can send the name of the player, height and weight, and full stats to Kyle at naturalstatesports.com. And everyone, regardless of classification, will be considered. So I wanted to go ahead and talk about that, along with making sure that you're subscribed. If you're not on YouTube, hit that notification button as well, so that way you know when we release an episode. Of course, we'll be going into basketball season as well as the spring sports, and we're also on Apple, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Kevin, so the 2024 season is officially complete after we played the 4A and 3A state championship games at Memorial Stadium to close out the year. We had some pretty good matchups. I know the Arkadelphia score was maybe a little bit misleading as far as how the game went. Very defensive game that had a lot of big-time touchdowns, 3 plays, 3 touchdowns, over 50 yards. And then, man, what a game that was against Salem and Bismarck to finish it off.
Yeah, Christian McCoy for Arkadelphia, the 3 touchdowns you're talking about covered 173 yards. And, Kyle, we talk about defense and how there's a lack of defense in today's game, but Arkadelphia proved that you could win it with defense. They took the ball away 11 times against an Elkins offense that the last 3 years they've been averaging 50 points a game. You know, they've been up in the top of the state leaders, no matter what classification. Jaquay Walden was hitting the backfield all day long. They just didn't have a chance. I mean, they just dominated. And, kudos to Coach Trey Shucker, one of the top young coaches in the state of Arkansas, what he's done since that rough start last year at the beginning of the season. They came out kind of slow. 2 years ago when they had Donovan Witten at quarterback, they thought that was going to be their year, and they just, ran into buzzsaw and couldn't get it done. So watching what this team has evolved into over the last 2 years is something to be excited about for their future, especially with the sophomore quarterback. And then Salem, sometimes it's not about, the full body of work, so to speak, because this team got beat 42-6 by Newport in the non-conference play. Right before they jumped into conference play. They lost in conference play. Lost two games in conference, if I'm not, or one. I'm not.
I think it was one conference game, and then they lost to Preston and Newport. To Atkins, I'm pretty sure.
Two. They were 1-2 to start conference play, and then they lost to Atkins. So they got hot at the right time. They played their best ball down the stretch. And when you got Caden Brink, how about 5 for 5 passing for Jackson Taylor? Going out there, making big runs at the end of the game, pulling away late. Something that nobody had really been able to do is kind of slow down that Bismarck offense and then score. They put 42 points on the board, over 300 yards rushing. What a great way to end the high school football season.
We'll get right into it here. First off, starting with our week 1 of the state championship games is kind of what that headline means. But of course, these games are not in the order that I guess they are in the order that they were played. I didn't realize. Yeah, I didn't even realize that I had done that. So, thank you to Will Watkins for making these graphics. So, Class 2A, Conway Christian 18-8 over EPC. The Eagles actually led that one 6-0 at half. EPC scored, and then after that, EPC didn't score again as the Eagles made another rally. Parkview, what more can you say about the Patriots? 3-time 5A state champions. They are 34. This senior class is 34-0 against 5A competition. They've got 3 losses to all 7A competition. I know Bryant was one of those.
North Little Rock, I believe.
North Little Rock, I think North Little Rock, actually, that was the last one they had lost before they went on their win streak. Yeah. They had that Bryant snapped this year. So all to 7A competition. Class 6A, Greenwood, a machine as well, their 12th state title, 5th since 2017, and then Bryant, the machine of Class 7A, they're 6th in the last 7 years in a comeback win over Bentonville, which they outscored the Tigers 21-10 in the fourth quarter. Kevin, one thing I noticed about all of these state championship games, including the 8, now the 8-man you had, the sportsmanship rule invoked, as well as Class 5A. Even though we had some other lopsided scores, you look at the Greenwood-Shiloh score, of course, the Arkadelphia and Elkins. We only had 2 where the running clock was going on. So I think actually Greenwood was up by 34 on Shiloh, and then Shiloh ended up – it was very close to getting the running clock there. But games were maybe a little bit closer than some expected. I think probably what was really nice to see to close the first weekend, you had that banger of a game with Bryant, and then, of course, to close out the season, you had a great game in that 3A matchup with Salem and Bismarck, like we're about to really go into detail here in just a second.
Yeah, and the Bryant-Bentonville really didn't surprise me because Bentonville has played close the last 2 years. Fayetteville last year, what was it, 22-19, I think was the final. But they kept that high-powered Fayetteville offense, pretty much in check. They still had over 350 yards passing, but it was a bend but don't break philosophy. So Jody Grant's team 3 years in a row, 3 pretty close losses to where they were in the game in the fourth quarter in all 3 games. Last 2 years ago, Bryant kind of pulled away late, but they'll be back next year. And then Greenwood, and we'll talk more about this here in a little bit. Are they the best in the state? They feel like they have made their case. They can only play what division they're in. They played 7A competition. Granted, it's not the top of 7A, but that's just who they can schedule. So we'll make more about that. Parkview, what a great run for those seniors. And a lot of people have asked me, they're like, well, what does Bolding retire, or Coach Brad Bolding, does he retire? Does he move schools and do it somewhere else? No. Why? You got everything set up. You've laid the foundation at Parkview for the last 4 years. People forget when he got there, they weren't very good. Gary Allman Jr. was their stud, and they were losing. They lost to Benton at War Memorial Stadium. I remember officiating that game. I think that was 2016, 2017. But stay there, keep developing those guys. You got a guy like Crosby Runt coming back next year in the backfield. Emmanuel Bunning, he'll be back. So you got a lot to build around there. And then Conway Christian, one of 2 teams this weekend, the first state title for their program, going along with Salem. So great week 1 to recap, and then we'll talk about 3A and 4A now.
We'll head into 4A. As I said, this was for those that, if you just look at the box score here, really, if you look at the box score, it'll make more sense. As you said at the top of the show, this was all defense. And that's what I had kind of said since the beginning of the playoffs, that I felt this Arkadelphia, while Elkins, you got to give them their respect. They had a great defense. They allowed about 11 points per game, 11, 12 points per game coming into this one. So you got to give them the credit in the world. But to me, Arkadelphia's defense was just different. I go back to Trey Shucker talking about back in July when we had media days. He stood up on the podium and he said, I feel like we have the best defense in Class 4A. They've got some very seasoned coaches on that side of the ball who have been doing this a long time. I believe their defensive coordinators actually coached at Washita, or had one of the colleges in Arkadelphia, has had that college experience. And it most definitely showed. And a big part of that was their defensive line. And that was what I had felt like was going to be the difference. I think you had actually mentioned the same thing. You think about Skylar McClure, who's going to come back and wreak havoc again next year. Nakeeson Wimberly, just starting with those 2 guys, you can just keep going on and on. Brady Wagner in the secondary, just a coach's son that going to play at Henderson State where his dad is an assistant. Just a ball hawk out there, had 2 interceptions, but and then, of course, ended up getting the MVP. But what was crazy to me, Kevin, you talked about the yardage that was covered on those scoring plays. So I compared this, and you would appreciate this as a baseball guy. This was kind of like one of those pitchers' duels in baseball where you're just trying with all you can to get a run across the plate, whether it's small ball or whether it's hitting the long ball. And that's exactly what Arkadelphia had. They hit the long ball 3 times, and they ended up making their last score with Nakeeson Wimberly, the defensive lineman, running it in from 14 yards. But first quarter, Bryson McCoy to Jay Purepoy, 57 yards. McCoy to Orion Roberts in the third quarter for 56 yards. And then McCoy to Maddox Finley for 65. So overall, the Elkins defense, when you look at Arkadelphia and Now, of course, the weather conditions were bad. The rain had held off for most of the game, but the field was still very wet. So there was a lot of fumbles, a lot of mishandled snaps, things like that. So both teams did struggle running the ball, particularly because of lost yardage. But you think about it, Arkadelphia, they were only held to a net of 50 yards rushing to Elkins' 21. So both of these defense, for the most part, did their job. Arkadelphia was just able to hit a few more big plays on them. But I think, again, it's just Elkins struggled to really do anything in large part. The whole defense for Arkadelphia was phenomenal, but really just in large part because of what that defensive line was able to do.
Yeah, and for Elkins, we talk about their defense, and we talked about them all year. You take away the 178 yards on those 3 pass plays, Arkadelphia gained 118 yards. So, I mean, that just shows you. And a lot of these offenses today are predicated on grind it, boom, hit that home run. Grind it, boom, you can hit that home run. A lot of people have talked about Greenwood, how they threw so many wide passes. They were taking what the defense gives them, okay? When you're playing especially a 2-deep safety, and you're not giving up much down the field as far as stretching it vertically, you take it, get it into your athlete's hands, okay? Arkadelphia took advantage of that, was able to pop 3 big ones at key times. So, and that was the difference in the game. Now, the Arkadelphia defense had 11 tackles for losses that totaled 100 yards. You talked about the 21 yards. Elkins gained 121 yards rushing, but they lost 100 yards on 11 tackles, whether it be sacks or just tackles for loss. I mean, it was just an outstanding effort. It's like they knew the snap count, but they didn't. The weather played a lot into that. Elkins could never get comfortable in offense. So for them to shut them out was next level. I didn't think Arkadelphia would shut them out. I thought they would win. I thought this would be kind of a 28-14 game, honestly. I think a 14-point spread would have been about right. But ideal conditions for a team that dominates the line of scrimmage and dominates the trench. So, like you talked about, Braden Wagner, 2 picks and a pass breakup. I mean, just ball hawking. So, I mentioned the 11 takeaways. That includes turnovers on down, the 2 fumbles, and I think 4 interceptions. So, when you can make the team give you the ball 11 times, you got a really good chance of winning.
Well, and I was very impressed with Malachi Hamilton in this one. He not only led the Badgers with 12 tackles, had the 1 for loss. He also carried 15, which was a team high, 15 carries for 40 yards, and really got most of his significant carries on the season in this game. That was per Chris Babb. Thanks to it's really nice to have the Arkadelphia broadcast team sitting right next to you, help feed you some stuff. But you look at Reese Campbell as well, 8 total tackles. Had a sack and a half, two and a half tackles for loss. Skylar McClure, I mentioned him. I don't know how many times Skylar McClure got in the backfield, but he was credited with 7 tackles, including 1.5 sacks. Braden Wagner, we talked about. Jacoby Campbell also had an interception and a sack. There was just so many guys. I mean, you could really – Amari Ford, I know, was another in the secondary that we called his name, had a big-time game. But then also, too, at Elkins, Brooks Williams led the Elks, 9 total tackles. And then which we got on the graphic here, Oliver. I believe it's Uraka is how you pronounce it.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, 7 tackles and then had the 2 for loss. Really, Jaquay Walden, Kevin, what an Iron Man he's been for this team. Of course, the 5 tackles and 2 for loss, also carried the football, caught 1 or 2 passes. He caught 2 passes. I have it right there in front of my face. So many things that he has done, particularly for this Elkins team over the past 2 years. I mean, this Elkins squad, thinking about where they came from, I know they've had a season here or there in the past that's been pretty good, but considering that they've won double-digit games, they've won 37 games over the past 3 years. I don't know that a lot of people, saw that coming. So, you definitely got to give we talked about Trey Shucker, one of the up-and-coming coaches. I know Zach Watson is also one of the up-and-coming coaches in this state, and he's proven that, especially with what the Elks have done over the last 3 years. I want to also mention a few more rushing stats here. Of course, Bryson McCoy, we mentioned 246 yards and 3 scores. Ben Napier, who has had a good season overall for the Elks, it's just, again, he only passed for 103 yards, and a lot of that was due to just the job that the Arkadelphia defensive line has done. So, this went about, again, I'm with you, Kevin. I think this was probably more of a 28 to, going into it, was more of a 28-14 game. But to shut out a team that has averaged what I think it's 46 points, what Elkins has done this year. Just really, this is one of the more dominant performances that I've seen, not just in a state championship in the game. So,
27-2 the last 2 years for Elkins. They run into the eventual state champion both years. Of course, Harding Academy last year gave them a game. I remember you and I were up in the press box at War Memorial for whatever game we were covering that night. And looking, I was like, Harding Academy and Elkins, it was back-to-back the whole game, and then Harding Academy pulled away late. So, Zach Watson, the Elks will be back. They'll have a chance. Like you said, they've had 10 or more wins the last 3 years. The year before that, I think they were 8-3. So 8-3 the year before that. So ever since COVID, they've been pretty much rolling where they need to be, and they're just going to keep being towards the top of 4A.
And then in Class 3A, closing out the rest of this coverage before we talk about who is number one overall in the state, or at least who we think should be. Salem, Kevin, you look at the play call right at the end of the first half. So there's 3 or 4 seconds left on the clock. And Caden Brink, So it's 20-20 tied. And Bismarck, this is where it got important. So they were getting the ball back after halftime. So they're thinking they just get in a prevent defense. They hold them. They go into the locker room, make their adjustments. They come back out. Well, that's not quite how it went. So Caden Brink, who's been phenomenal for this team, I mean, he's been the workhorse for a team that came into the game. They rushed for 300 yards on the night, and we've seen why they were able to put up. So they finished the year with 4,500 yards, did Salem, and around 60 touchdowns. So, when you're able to run the football in teams like that, you're going to have a lot of success. But it was really the passing game that was ultimately the difference in this game. You talked about Jackson Taylor. He was 5 for 5 on the night, but on the first drive, really caught him sleeping because, of course, Bismarck's thinking they're lining up in the dead. They're lining up in the dead tee. They're lining up in the power I. And then they get him over the top on that first play. And then there was another 1 or 2 plays that they got him for big passing gains. So ultimately, the passing game for Salem was the difference in the final result, and none more important than when Jackson Taylor hit Caden Brink up that left sideline, which was the Bismarck sideline. And you're like, okay, are they going to get him? Here comes the safety. Here comes the other defensive backs. Oh, no, he's in. And they had to, of course, review it to make sure that he wasn't out before he hit the pylon. But ultimately, they scored. And, yes, that was at the end of the first half. But you look at the final score, think about how massive that was. To me, it was the turning point of the game.
Yeah, because there was pressure right away in this game because of the inability to kick an extra point. So, from there on out, you're having to go for 2, and you're really having to get into your playbook a little bit. So that adds a little bit of anxiety to not only the play callers, the coaches, but the kids themselves. So they put a little bit of extra added pressure on themselves, because when you can 20-20, knowing you're getting the ball back, you feel like you're up going into half versus, well, now we're down 8. It's not just a touchdown and an extra point. It's a touchdown and we got to go for 2. So that changes the entire mindset. When I knew Salem was going to win this game, and people will call me a liar because I picked Bismarck. I thought Bismarck was the better team. But it was that first play of the game where they stretched the defense. When you're playing a team that's averaging 300 yards a game, and that's what they did, 4,500 yards, 60 touchdowns over 15 games is right at 300 yards a game. When you're lining up against a team that you know is going to run it 60 times a game, that's in your mind. That's what you're going to do. First is going to be a belly play, off a veer play, whatever it is, whether they're in the bone, the tee, split back veer, power I like they were part of the night. That's the first thing you're thinking about as a defensive coordinator and as a defensive player. Had Salem shown that they can throw the ball in the first play of the game? Probably. They probably opened it up a little bit at some point this year. But for the execution on that play is what won them that game, because for the rest of the game, and there were only 4 more passes. One of those was that 37-yard touchdown to Caden Brink right before the end of the half. It was always in the back of their minds. So they're not playing head over toes. Like it's a coaching term, but you're always wanting to play with your head over your toes going forward, okay? You're kind of back on your heels. You're kind of thinking a little bit more than what you should be and not just reacting. So another Coach Josh Watson, outstanding play call right there. That really set the tone for that game. And Bismarck just had to play catch up from there, Kyle. And we knew it was going to be back and forth the whole game. That touchdown right before half really sealed the deal, because right there, Jackson Taylor at the end of the game, they got up 42-28, kind of ran it down. Bismarck did score. It was a meaningless touchdown, but set the final margin at 42-34. But these teams go for two a lot in Class 2A and 3A because they don't have a kicker, evidently. That's what everybody's thinking. No, Bismarck's kicker had kicked 80% extra points on the year. That's pretty good, especially for high school. But it just sets you behind the eight ball. I was talking to Coach DJ Mars, shout out, 2-3A conference member along with Salem. And he's like, we're just going to have to go for two all the time next year, because that's what everybody's doing now. They're trying to put pressure on defenses, put pressure on teams to come up and do that. And I got to thinking about it during the game. All right, so that last touchdown scoring drive that Bismarck had, Ben Keithley ran it in from like 12 yards out. It was a little power read play. Cademan, I think, was the back in the back. Cademan Keithley was in the backfield with him, brought him across, and then Ben Keithley shoots up the middle for 12 yards. All right, so wide open defense, and he ran right at the middle. And then when they go for two, they get in their jumbo set, and they pack everybody in the middle. When you have all 11 guys within the tackle box, within 5 or 7 yards of the football, he runs up the middle and gets stuffed. And I'm sitting here thinking, why, when you can spread everybody out and let Ben Keithley do his work, and now you pack it in on them. So there was a lot of game within a game on Saturday night, and Salem came out on top because of that first play.
And I think too, I guess Salem was up 2 scores going into the fourth quarter, like very early, like a minute or two into the fourth quarter, and they had it for like 9 minutes because they got the ball
10:25 to a minute 35.
10:25. Yeah. So because it was right there, and I knew it was right under that 2-minute mark. So I mean, great job of ball control. That's their kind of game. But that's what ultimately, because Ben Keithley, he scored on that play just right up the middle. And that was a smart play. The middle of the field was wide open. So, I mean, why not take what they give you? And he had been running. I mean, you look at his numbers right here, 19 carries for 118 yards and 3 scores on the night. So, the run was there. Now, he did get a lot of stuff outside as well throughout the game. But that was really what was the turning point, because then the onside kick didn't – I mean, I think it went like 6 yards. It didn't even get close to even really getting close.
Their first one was better, but they were offsides. Right. So at that point, he whiffed it, and it went 6 yards, illegal touching, and there you go.
Yeah, and what a big season for Jackson Taylor. This was his first year under center. So, Kevin, a little bit of a hot take here. It's harder to, in some cases, to take over as the running back or the quarterback of a run-heavy offense than it is maybe a spread or so. And I say that because you've got to do so much more reading and so much quicker. You've got to read your blocks because you got to learn to pitch it, to keep it, reading the defensive ends, reading the linebackers. So to do what he did, come out on this stage in his first year starting, and again, that was one of the things that we kept talking about. We felt like both of these teams might have some nerves being in the state championship game for the first time, but I almost feel like we didn't see that. Just to go ahead and mention, we were very wrong on that. But I almost think the competition of Class 3A and all that these two teams played, not only, you think about both of these teams played Mansfield and beat them. Both of these teams played Prescott, and Salem's case played them twice. All these teams that they beat, Bismarck beat an undefeated Fordyce team.
Boom.
All these teams.
I
mean, just the road that they had to get here, I think prepared them for that moment, just because and that's a big reason maybe why the lights weren't too bright. But Jackson Taylor, just a phenomenal performance. You could have made a case for Caden Brink to get it to get the MVP as well. 25 carries, 131 yards, 2 scores, plus that. I mean, the most important play of the game to me, that 37-yard touchdown. Ryan Bailey, actually, let's see, I think he did. Yeah, he did end up leading. I couldn't remember if he had led in total tackles with 9, including 1 for loss. Ferris Wheat also had a tackle for loss, along with Aiden Province. Then the Keithley brothers, Kevin. I mean, the top 2 performers really for this team. Preston Hughes has been another big one for them. Also defensively, Lucas Chapman, 8 total tackles, 1 sack, and then 2 for loss. But Caden Keithley and Ben Keithley, I mean, they both just do so many different things, both offensively and defensively. I know this was a huge night and a huge season for the Keithley family in particular to be on this stage.
Yeah, and Cade Keithley, who I remember he had that game where he was like, 6 carries for 240 yards or something, and that was when Ben Keithley was out. And Ben Keithley was out for the Prescott win when they won 33-29. He came back, he looked good. He had 270 yards, 4 touchdowns, total offense, did everything he could. And the younger one, Cade, 7 catches, 73 yards, and then couldn't run the ball as much. Salem did a really good job of taking that away, but he contributed on defense, 7 solo tackles. Just ahead for the football. Those coaches' kids, they're pretty heady. They've been around the game a long time. So, excuse me. Back to Salem real quick, and you were talking about Jackson Taylor. With the it's a triple option offense, basically. Okay, it's not Harding University where they're running out of the flex bone or the wishbone. But when you're talking about the reads and you're talking about the keys, to step into that type of offense, it is tough. I remember, when we moved from El Dorado to Mills, we were running the triple shoot, which is the Naval Academy and Military Academy offense, where it's kind of like similar to Harding University. So I'm coming in thinking, all right, read a fullback dive, and there's a lot more that goes into it. You're always reading keys. You're reading where linebackers, where safety. You're not reading where so much safeties are set up, but whether the defensive tackle's in a 4-eye, where he's at, where the end's at, if he's out in the wide, not a 7 or 9. So there's a lot that really goes into it. Spread quarterbacks, they've been throwing it. They, know what to look like. Everything's really short, dink, dunk, get down the field. So I echo your sentiments on that for Jackson Taylor stepping into that offense and, running it, very efficiently. To average 300 yards on the ground is, a testament to what he's done this year. So, yeah, it's tough. And what they've done this year, it was good to see them because, you think back, Salem was in that boat where, they'd go 10-0, then they'd run into somebody from the South, like a Prescott or even a Booneville, the teams that have really dominated Class 3A. So it was really good to see new blood in the state championship game in Class 3A because for the longest at Rivercrest, Harding Academy, Booneville, Prescott, you could really probably name 4 or 5 schools and they were going to be there every year. So for these two to break through and get to the finals offered, the classification, something new to look at, and makes me think that going into next year, it's going to be even more wide open and knowing that, look, Fordyce is going to be back with Cadillac Ellison. Hopefully he comes back from his injury. We're wishing him the best as he gets on the road to recovery, but really looking forward again to Class 3A next year.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I mentioned was for that last weekend, 3 of the 4 teams playing had never been in a state championship game before. Now, Arkadelphia, you look back to the early 70s, the Outlaw days, then J.R. Eldridge, of course. Yeah, their 5th one. So because J.R. got 2 and then Outlaw got 2, and they had been, I think, 3 other times before. Then Trey Shucker gets this one. So we had been familiar with Arkadelphia in the state final. It had been a few years, but Elkin's getting there for the first time. And, yeah, it's just nice to see that parity. Look, we don't root for anybody or root against anybody. But at the same time, it is nice to see new faces. You saw Harding Academy every single year. I know McGee was another one that was kind of in that mix, at least as far as making deep runs. But one of the other things about – and when you have 4,200 now 4,500 rushing yards on the year, it's not shocked that multiple guys touched the ball. And so 5 of them touched it the other night for Salem. And, of course, Caden Brink, he led with 131 yards. And then Jackson Taylor – also, got his as well with the 69, but also Dylan Gaskins had a carry. Skylar Payne as well. I know there's been another one, Ethan Birmingham, as well as Caleb Leisner. And Caleb Leisner, Kevin, goes about 5'3", 5'4", and I'm not joking, 5'3", 5'4", maybe soaking wet. But he is tough as nails. Loved watching him play. Yeah, I mean, and he just embodies that small town. That it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Love to watch him run the football. So, yes, congrats to both of these teams. Phenomenal runs. I know for Bismarck, it's a gut punch, straight up. It's a gut punch to get that far unbeaten. come up short, but both of these towns have nothing but should be beaming with nothing but pride to get to this point, and especially the turnarounds that both have made with their programs. So we'll close it out here with a little bit of a hot take. Why not? It's the holiday season. I don't know if this will be our last show for football, but we might do something, kind of a basketball preview before we get into 2025. But who is number one overall? And there seems to be a little bit of a hot take. Kevin, I kind of get the vibe that maybe this is just my assumption, I think that this is kind of more so between two schools in particular, one in 7A and one in 6A, just because we've seen somewhat pump. Now, Greenwood, they've made a statement straight up that Arkansas media should do our job and, this and that, which I'll be honest, I didn't particularly care for that wording. I don't think that there was anything personal. I didn't particularly care for the way that it was worded, but and then there's also Bryant that, Coach Sanders had, I don't know if it was directed towards just the high school football landscape or anything like that. But he mentioned about how I think his exact words were, if I'm not mistaken, in his post-game interview, that we're the best or something along those lines. Here's my whole thing, and I'll go ahead and say mine, and then I'll give you the floor. So you and I, for those that listen to baseball and softball, they know that you and I talk about strength of schedule. And you talked about it, and you nailed it. Greenwood has so many options, especially those River Valley, Northwest Arkansas schools, as far as quality competition in the higher classifications. A lot of times you do have to go out of state. They played Stillwater. They played other, just like a lot of those Northwest Arkansas programs have. But they did play up in classification. Whether those teams were 5th, 6th, and 7th respectively in their conference or not, they still did that. They played in the 6A West, which is hands down the toughest comp. Probably, I would honestly go as far to say the 6A West might be the second toughest conference in the state behind the 7A Central. When you think about especially the top teams, 7A West.
The depth of it is, I think they're deeper.
Yes.
So, when you have a Van Buren that can go on the road and beat Marion, so
exactly.
you're deeper. So, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you added that in. I agree wholeheartedly. But then you look at Bryant, who made it through the toughest conference. I think many would agree the 7A Central is probably, especially with how good Conway was this year. And they were definitely a top 3-4 team, no question. So they had to make it through that. They went through the undefeated run to win another 7A state championship. But it's their non-conference schedule, Kevin, that really – and I'm going to say this too. I want to make sure I add this in here. And this is going to sound cop-out. I don't have a problem with Greenwood or Bryant at number one. To me, those are the only two teams that are up for debate. I don't have a problem with it if somebody puts Greenwood at number one. I'm fine with that. I think they've got a good argument. But if this is Kyle Sutherland doing this, it's Bryant for me. And the reason why, you beat a 6A semifinalist. They beat Benton a lot, I know, but they beat a 6A semifinalist. You beat a 6A quarterfinalist from Missouri, which 6A in Missouri is the highest class. That's their 7A up there.
Their 7A, yeah.
And Christian Brothers College or whatever the school is called. And then you beat Parkview, who is a 3-time 5A state champion that can compete with just about anybody in the state.
Like a drum. They beat them.
Absolutely. Well. Yes. And, it was a 30-10 score, but Bryant dominated just about in every facet of that game. Now, I will say this, too. I said before this, if you pull the tapes from media days, from when you and I did our preview, I said that Parkview and Greenwood coming into the season probably had the two best rosters in the state. I wanted to see what Bryant could do coming off, and I felt like Bryant was going to make a strong comeback. And I said at times throughout this season, I even believe that Greenwood is probably the number one team. Here we are through the season. My personal opinion, I don't see how Bryant is not the number one team. And then people can say Central Arkansas bias, whatever you want to call it. I call it deep analysis and doing my job as Greenwood encouraged us to do. So that's the way that I look at it, is we can only look at facts and we can only look at strength of schedule. When it comes to this, when they're not playing each other.
Yeah. And
I know that's tough because, again, it's not the fault of the kids, the schedule they play. I don't even really fault the coaches, because when you're that good, it's hard to find teams that not only that you want to get a good look against, but that will play you. But to me, it's Bryant, and I don't think that there's really any debate about it for the most part.
Yeah, Parkview had to go out of state and play Melissa, Texas because Springdale Harbor wasn't going to play them again, and North Little Rock really wasn't going to play them because that's just how good Parkview's gotten. So, Maumelle, thank you for stepping up and, playing above your weight class right there. So, and I've debated a lot about this too, and I'll play devil's advocate because why not? That's what this show's about. Is about offering analysis and opinions that maybe others may have or may not have. So I'll play it like this. I think strength of schedule is one thing, and we debated about this in baseball over the last 2 years. Of okay, is Valley View, they have the best roster, they have the best, moving forward. But could they beat a Springdale Harbor? Could they beat a Rogers? Well, they did beat Rogers, so it really didn't matter. So, you could see a 5A school beating a 6A school. In baseball, we don't have 7A anymore. So football, we do. I think you have the argument for Greenwood to be number one based on the ability of Kane Archer himself. And I'm not saying he is the second coming. I'm saying he's the best offensive player in the state of Arkansas with everything he has around him. Okay. When you're able to, and I don't really think we got to see the full power of what Greenwood could do till the finals.
That's fair.
When they were on the field for a full game. And still with that, you saw some breakdowns in the secondary, but everybody had that this year. Even Bryant, when they were playing Pulaski Academy, the second time around, they got it. I guarantee you if Greenwood plays Shiloh Christian again, it is a mercy rule, and they maybe put the pedal to the metal a little bit more. What they can do in the run game and how smooth and efficient they are on offense is something that reminded you of a lot of what the 2005 Springdale team did. The ability for them to apply pressure at every point during the game on offense, defense, and special teams with the specialists that they have. Champ Davis, Grant Carnes. They can do just about anything. When you can go out and score 60 and 70 points in a half, that's next level stuff right there. So I know Bryant could do that. I would love to see the game on the field, honestly.
Yeah.
I think you have the two best that are the best in the trenches right there between Bryant and Greenwood. No disrespect to Parkview, Arkadelphia. Those guys played great, both sides of the ball. Greenwood is a little bit more multiple. They're able to do a little bit more on offense. You saw in the 7A championship game, it was Jordan Walker or bust. They really didn't stretch the field that much. They really didn't do a whole lot. The running game was really kind of held in check right there. I think Greenwood takes it a step further. Would they beat Bryant? Who knows? We don't know. But I'm going to play devil's advocate and say Greenwood does have their they do have their argument. And I think Kane Archer being the X factor right there moving forward, I think they have their shot to say, hey, they're the best in the state.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and I mean that's if I were and I want to reiterate too, I'm fine. I said in the middle of my spiel that I'm fine with it if Greenwood is number one. And a lot of it is exactly what you just talked about. I think Kane Archer is, as far as his mind, the connection that he has, and he's got a great arm and all the tools and stuff.
The
but
feet,
as far as the feet, what he has between his ears is what makes him different to me. I mean, just how he's put in so much work with so many quarterback gurus, and he's such a relentless worker and a very underrated runner. He's not blazing fast, but he's shifty. He's got a great stiff arm, as we saw. And like you said, when you're throwing to Champ Davis, Grant Carnes, and their offensive line is freaking massive.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with Greenwood. To me, it's those two teams and nobody else. I think the debate stops with those two. But I do, as I said in my spiel, I do give the edge to Bryant, but I think that it's pretty cool. I'm going to say this. I think it's pretty cool that we're talking about two teams that not only, in two different classifications, but we're also talking about two teams that probably deserve their spot for consideration for national rankings. That's what's probably the coolest to me about this and now I'm not saying both should be in the top 25, but I definitely think that both deserve as far as, whether it's honorable mention, and that's not something that we see in Arkansas a lot. So just the simple fact that we're having this debate between a 6A and a 7A school. That's what I'm most proud of here.
Absolutely, because Arkansas is really kind of overlooked in the national debate, just about any sport. Basketball and baseball, they've made their way in the conversation, but especially football, because you're surrounded by states that dominate the conversation. Think of Mississippi, come to the SIP. Hell, everybody from Arkansas is going to the SIP right now. So, per capita, they have a lot of athletes over there, and it's basically the same size of Arkansas. They have us by a couple 100,000, but they put out more D1 athletes per capita than just about any state in the South. Then you got Texas, Louisiana. Think of the powerhouses that have come out of Louisiana. The coach that has the most wins out of John Curtis. West Monroe, Ruston is back for another state championship, who Cabot played the last 3 years. I don't think they're going to play him again because they got the brains beat in 3 times. And then you got Missouri, who plays a good brand of ball. I think they're behind Arkansas, honestly. But you look up there in Blue Valley, Shawnee Mission, Christian Brothers, all those St. Louis area schools. It's a great football state. And then you got Oklahoma, who has unlimited. When you look at Bixby, the Oklahoma City area, Tulsa area with Broken Arrow, Jinx, Tulsa Union, there's just a ton of good football over there. So Arkansas is really kind of surrounded by all these football powerhouses, and they're left out of the national conversation a lot. You've had some teams that have been up there, Little Rock Central, Springdale, Pine Bluff that we've talked about. But these 2 teams deserve that national recognition and regional recognition, because Bryant especially, and you think back to the Deion Sanders game, and I know you were covering it, I think.
Yep.
So you look back at Shadur Sanders came to town, and Bryant ended up winning that game. Austin Ledbetter had an outstanding night.
He outplayed Shadur. Frankly.
Yeah, he outplayed Shadur Sanders. Yeah. And Sanders was he wasn't a Heisman finalist, but he's in the top 10 of the Heisman. So you got teams that'll come and play Bryant, and Bryant's been on the road. They've played teams. Now, are they going to go on the road and play DeSoto or Duncanville or anybody like that? Possibly, because Bryant's going to have and Greenwood's going to have a hard time finding people to play. Now, next cycle. So Greenwood played Bentonville West, Harbor, and Northside, right?
Yes, and certainly in their defense. Now they do usually play Northside. That's a pretty common non-conference game. We expected Bentonville West to probably be that 3rd, 4th best. So they expected them to probably be a little bit better.
Yeah. The interesting thing, Kyle, all 3 of those schools will have new coaches next cycle. They'll have new coaches this time, maybe next week, from what we hear. Who knows? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the scheduling cycle. Yeah, they'll have to play each other next year because this is a 2-year deal. But starting in 2026, maybe Greenwood steps out, goes back into Oklahoma, goes into Texas. We'll have to see. But for now, Greenwood and Bryant, 1A, 1B, however you see it.
No question. Yeah, that's the one thing that I think anybody that has paid attention to high school, with all respect to, Parkview, I know that they've been phenomenal, certainly a top 3 overall team the past 3 years. But, of course, that loss to Bryant kind of hurts their case. But yeah, no question. And, of course, obviously Bryant had to overcome tons of injuries at linebacker. Greenwood had to overcome, something that we dread not only as just human beings, but especially as parents with, the terrible tragedy with Isaiah Arrington and his sister and mother. But, overall, man, I'll tell you, it's a bittersweet time of year because we love the Friday nights. We love the grind of football season, but I think we're probably ready for a little bit of rest, especially. So, well, it was a lot of fun doing it. Kevin, I guess you'll be back. We'll be doing here in a couple months. We'll be doing some baseball preview. We've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline for baseball and softball season. So if you like the spring sports, you'll definitely want to tune in. And we'll have during basketball season, we'll probably be more guest oriented. We'll definitely have our guy Eric Taylor from the Democrat Gazette on some. We'll have Steve Henson, the voice of Maumelle, talking about some of those teams in Class 5A since he'll see so many of them. We'll have probably some coaches as well, but we're going to have a little bit of a mix probably as we get into basketball. And then Kevin and I, of course, will be doing baseball. And then Jared Hawthorne will be back joining us for this. So I guess this is all 3 of us will be our 4th season doing it. So time flies when you're having fun, and we love doing this. So, but yeah, that will do it for the 2024 football season, maybe the 2024 Arkansas Preps Weekly slate. Like I said, we might have one there between Christmas and New Year's, a little bit of a guest lineup, and kind of talk a little bit of hoops and stuff like that. So, but if you, I want to remind everybody one more time, YouTube as well, if you prefer to watch, or if you don't want to look at our faces, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, we are on all of those platforms. But for Kevin Bohannon and all of us here at Natural State Sports, I want to wish everybody Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and thank you for tuning in during football. We'll see you for some hoops coverage on the next go-around.